Story 1. They have a healthy, supportive, loving, and respectful relationship with their parents. Story 2. They have excellent boundaries. If they notice a situation is unfair, they restore balance. Story 3. They will not order anything expensive when someone else is paying the bill. Story 4. They seem genuinely happy and empathetic. They understand conversations go both ways and do not try to hog the spotlight unless the situation calls for it. Story 5. They experience stability and a more regulated nervous system. They do not go into fight or flight like people who are traumatized. Story 6. They feel confident when standing up to someone on their friend's behalf. Story 7. How they treat strangers, particularly service staff such as servers and retail workers. Story 8. They return their shopping carts and pick up litter instead of stepping over the litter. Story 9. The ability to see multiple perspectives even when emotionally charged. Story 10. They can self-regulate their emotions. For example, they remain calm in stressful situations. Story 11. Normally, people associate being well-worded, educated, or polite with a really good upbringing. However, speaking for myself, having been born dirt poor, you can also achieve that through libraries. In other words, self-education. Story 12. Kindness. Not doing something to post on TikTok. True kindness is shown in how someone treats everyone. Story 13. When they are emotionally regulated, it is a huge green flag. Story 14. Change the subject when invited to gossip about someone. Story 15. Manners are the ability to read the room and engage gracefully and appropriately while maintaining a comfortable emotional distance. Self-actualization includes immediately recognizing when to walk away and doing so quietly without announcing it. Story 16. They are kind and respectful to people who can do nothing for them or who are looked down on by society. Story 17. They remain cordial during arguments and treat everyone with basic politeness. Story 18. Their facial expression conceals emotions and surprises, as emotional regulation would. Story 19. When they attend a potluck or group cookout, they make sure the young children are served properly. Story 20. When they treat service workers with respect, especially when no one is watching. Story 21. They are mentally and financially stable, well-mannered, and kind. Story 22. They have a very loving relationship with their parents but still maintain healthy boundaries. Story 23. They push their chair in when they get up from the table. Story 24. Self-confidence, intelligence, and fluent engagement with other adults. Story 25. They can't wait to tell their parents good news, and when something goes wrong, they turn to their immediate family for comfort. Story 26. Make eye contact and hold a polite conversation without constantly looking at your phone. Be kind to the elderly. Own up to your mistakes. Story 27. I would say it is when people show genuine respect for others, no matter who they are. They do not make a show of treating everyone with kindness. It is clear they were taught to be considerate. People who can handle conflict calmly without resorting to drama or insults usually come from stable upbringings and know how to communicate and make others feel comfortable. Story 28. I want to be understanding without being forced and to own up to mistakes in a mature way. I told my mother that one family member is the main topic in my therapy sessions. She looked at me and said, "Tell them everything you need to heal. I don't care if it was the wrongdoings your father and I committed. You need to talk about it and heal." Story 29. Kindness. They have enough confidence to be kind. Story 30. I remember going to summer camp as a kid and meeting Milo. He sought attention and validation and would take food from the cafeteria back to his bunk, like eggs and toast. At the time I thought he was strange, but looking back, he was probably neglected at home. Thin as a rail and likely malnourished, he wanted as much food as he could get and someone to acknowledge him. It was sad. Story 31. My best friend had great parents and a happy home life. I had never known anyone like that before. He enjoys visiting his family and calls them often, but he maintains healthy and appropriate boundaries that they respect. He says the only negative that came from this is that he trusts people too much and always gives them the benefit of the doubt. He is also a natural caregiver, which is funny because he is the very definition of a curmudgeon otherwise. Story 32. They do not pass on family problems that would traumatize their children and require therapy in adulthood. Story 33. Shows empathy, willingness to help, a good sense of humor, the ability to self-soothe and regulate emotions, and an overall positive attitude toward life. Story 34. Overall good manners, saying please and thank you, cleaning up the table for waitstaff at restaurants and so on. It shows respect for others and a lack of entitlement, in my opinion. It costs absolutely nothing to be polite. You do not know what kind of day someone is having. Story 35. When they treat service workers, such as waitstaff and retail employees, with the same courtesy and respect they show to the people they are with. Story 36. They are often confident and assertive without being intimidating. Story 37. Their demeanor, how they treat others, and their relationships with their parents. Story 38. They say things like that. I am sure I would have ended up in pretty much the same place I am now if I had been placed in a home as a baby and not raised by my parents. This stayed with me. Story 39. They have a great relationship with their parents, enjoy spending time with family, and have a general sense of optimism. Story 40. Never show up to a party empty-handed unless sincerely asked not to. Do not make a mess at a restaurant or someone else's home. Treat all staff well, especially those who are more disadvantaged than you. Tip 20% when you are obligated to. Use proper table manners. Keep your volume down in public. Maintain basic levels of decorum and respect privacy, both your own and others. Be open-minded about different perspectives and life experiences. Story 41. They always have a secure mindset, do not compare themselves to others, and are soft-spoken. Story 42. They stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves and do not stay quiet when someone is being bullied. Story 43. I recently saw a family leave all their leftover food on the table at a McDonald's and leave outside food, such as snacks and beer cans, scattered around the area. What a trashy family. Clearing your own dishes at a self-service restaurant is my answer. Story 44. My boyfriend stays positive no matter what and can always see the best in people and give everyone the benefit of the doubt. He comes from a very happy, normal, loving family. Story 45. They seem comfortable in their own skin and feel as though who they are is enough. Story 46. Being able to clearly communicate and process emotions in response to different situations. Story 47. When someone says they miss their parents or when tragedy occurs and they say they wish their mother or father were here right now, I have no idea what that is like. Laughing out loud. Story 48. My husband doesn't speak ill of anyone unless he is really provoked. He doesn't talk behind people's backs or call anyone names unless, as I said, he is provoked or confronted. In my household, that was called bonding and acceptance by my raging narcissistic mother. My husband's family is kind, loving, and supportive, and it shows in the subtle ways he goes about things. Story 49. If they are arrested for a serious crime, the family is visibly embarrassed and remorseful. Story 50. Well-rounded, well-read, has a strong sense of self and acts accordingly. Story 51. They include many small courtesies that are easy to overlook because they are not obvious manners, such as saying please and thank you. Politely ask before using something in the home of someone else. For example, ask, may I please use your restroom rather than where is your restroom? Be mindful of costs when someone else is paying. Make an effort to be careful with the possessions of others. Focus on inclusion in group situations so no one is ignored or excluded. Story 52. They feel perfectly comfortable staying in the living room when their parents come home. Story 53. They are patient, attentive, and listen. I recently learned that people who are neglected overshare and interrupt a lot. I used to blame this on attention deficit disorder, ADD. Since I became more aware of this behavior, I have done my best to stop. My brain still runs at full, non-stop speed, but with effort and patience I have learned to prevent my mouth from trying to keep up. Story 54. My husband exudes confidence. He has received endless encouragement and support and feels secure in himself and in his choices, things I cannot relate to. Story 55. Kindness and magnanimity are qualities only people who've had a fortunate, ideal upbringing are familiar with. I experience these from my significant other. I sometimes don't like my mother-in-law because she can be meddlesome, but when I'm angry or annoyed, I remind myself she raised my partner almost single-handedly, since my partner's father has been absent. I'm grateful to her and often put her needs before my own because she is my partner's mother, and my partner is truly one of a kind. I even prioritize my mother-in-law over my own parents, except in urgent or special circumstances when someone else's needs should take precedence. Story 56. Emotional maturity is important. Yes, it can also come from healing from trauma or a difficult upbringing, but it is such a green flag for me. Story 57. I did not have an overall good upbringing, but my family certainly taught me manners. Setting the table for dinner when there are guests, staying at the table until everyone finishes eating, and so on. I thought they were uptight. When I grew up, I realized how awkward it can be to grab a plate from a cabinet in someone else's house or to be the only person still at the table. Not uptight, just considerate. Story 58. To me, a good upbringing is not synonymous with never having a problem. It teaches you that you will have problems, how to avoid them when possible, and how to deal with them, survive, and even prosper when circumstances allow. It helps you come through with a positive, loving mindset rather than being crushed. That is a real accomplishment. If your upbringing helps you achieve it, it must have been impressively good. Story 59. Engage in conversation without talking about yourself, one-upping others, or interrupting. Story 60. Their lack of understanding of the trauma other people have experienced, whether emotional, financial, or otherwise. Story 61. Someone who is capable of entering a healthy relationship knows their worth and recognizes and leaves toxic situations. Story 62. They can talk about anything with their parents. Politics, life worries, and relationships. Story 63. There is an overall lack of empathy. It is incredibly difficult to empathize with experiences you have not had. Many people show a limited sense of depth and reality. Friends who had good childhoods often cannot fathom how important certain things are and are out of touch. This is like how people raised with great wealth do not understand the importance of money and cannot imagine that $500 is a lot to some people. Story 64. They are truly able to listen instead of jumping to conclusions or inserting their opinion or story into your experience. This shows they have a solid sense of self and are empathetic, yet do not entangle your emotions or experience with their own. Story 65. They do not flinch or cover their face when you pretend to hit them. Story 66. 1. How do they act when they are angry? 2. Are they willing to share with others, especially when they have few possessions? 3. How do they interact with other people? 4. How do they speak about others? 5. Are they willing to help someone in need? Story 67. They do things to improve the lives of others without advertising. Story 68. They accidentally caused an emergency and say it is okay. Let me call my dad. They know they can. Story 69. Manners are by far the real test of a good upbringing. Story 70. Begin stomping and slamming cabinets and dishes, but do not appear angry. Observe how they react. Story 71. Saying please and thank you. Children and adults who do not say these words are rude, and I immediately question how they were raised. Story 72. They send thank you emails after downloading portable document format files and apologize to their plants for watering them 5 minutes late. Sorry, Timothy the succulent, that YouTube video really got me sidetracked. Story 73. The most pessimistic and the most optimistic people I know both had ideal childhoods, careers, and spouses, and they led nearly magical, trauma-free lives. It is hard to tell from the outside. Story 74. I had a difficult upbringing. These are things I try to do because it is called do not be a piece of shit. Story 75. I think this is a silly question because you cannot really tell unless you get to know someone and their story. Like many of these, I can say that I do, but it is not because I enjoyed my upbringing. I am joking. Story 76. They have a good relationship with their mother, which remains respectful of boundaries. Story 77. Manners in general. Correcting someone with good intentions and in an appropriate manner so as not to embarrass the other person. Willingness to give to others joyfully. Focusing on the underlying principles of issues rather than on gossip or surface details. Strong self-reflection and the ability to express oneself with composure. Personal hygiene and home cleanliness. Story 78. This assumes that a person with healthy, desirable traits or character is that way because of positive influence and guidance during their upbringing. Sometimes people are or present as healthy, well-functioning members of society in spite of their upbringing. Sometimes it is more nature than nurture. Sometimes it is the result of sustained effort to recondition the biological systems shaped by their original environment and family of origin. There is no guarantee that who a person becomes directly represents a good or bad family background. Recognizing the varied internal and external factors that affect a person's life path and that shape their personality, character, emotional intelligence and intelligence quotient, and ultimately their overall development, has reinforced my understanding that, while upbringing does influence us, there is often no one-to-one negative or positive correlation. Story 79. Most people in this thread are not answering the question asked. I think the sign of a good upbringing is how well you treat others. Story 80. They rinse their recyclables thoroughly before putting them in the bin. They check their pockets before using the washing machine. They return calls promptly. They take cloth bags to the grocery store. They remember people's birthdays and send a card. They speak to vagrants to say, "Have a good day." Story 81. Willingness to think the best of people, consistently giving others the benefit of the doubt within reason. Story 82. This will sound sad, but there are very special people who notice when you are having a rough time without asking a single question. They just know. When I say rough time, I do not mean I do not have coffee in the morning because it is expensive. I mean something more serious like, I am going to be homeless because I have very bad family problems. Story 83. Nice manners. Your manners are a good indicator of the kind of person you were raised to be. For example, holding the door open, being polite to service workers, and offering your seat on public transport. When I see people acting like this, I know their parents raised them well. Story 84. They do good things not because they expect to be rewarded, but because it is the right thing to do, for example, helping someone whose car has broken down. Story 85. They have pictures of their natal family in their house. Story 86. They are courteous, respectful, and considerate toward others, doing small things like cleaning up after themselves in public, returning their shopping carts, and being polite to service workers and strangers. Story 87. Maintain healthy relationships with almost everyone, not only romantic ones. Story 88. I grew up very poor and spent a year of my adult life living in an extremely wealthy old money town in Connecticut for work. One day, I went to an Italian restaurant with acquaintances and mentioned that I had an aversion to pasta when I was younger because it was the meal we ate during hard times. My family ate spaghetti for weeks when my father was not working in the winter. Other people I have met have told me similar stories of their families eating something cheap over and over because it was all they could afford. No one at the table could relate. They had never experienced a time when their family struggled to put food on the table. I was surprised, but I suppose they had a good upbringing. Story 89. They are shocked and horrified when you mention something that was a normal occurrence in your own shitty childhood. Story 90. They remember others not for what they can do, but for interesting things about them. They do not assume everything will fall apart, so they are relaxed when approaching new situations. They tell their family about their lives. Story 91. I cannot fathom how grown adults can flip out and throw tantrums when told no, behaving like toddlers. Story 92. They can handle criticism without bringing themselves down. Story 93. Manners. Address elders as sir and ma'am until you have a relationship with them. Story 94. The way someone speaks to you or to others is reflected in their words. Manners and politeness are apparent. Story 95. They do not look tired and do not have dark circles under their eyes by the time they are teenagers. Story 96. They react to funny stories someone shares about their terrible upbringing and start crying because that is horrible. Story 97. Everyone I met in my life who was truly happy had a good upbringing and enjoyed good friends, a good job, and good hobbies. Story 98. Sharing. Doing the dishes without being asked or expected to do so. Making your bed and keeping your room tidy. Story 99. Wherever they go, they feel like they belong there. It does not occur to them that a place could reject them. Story 100. They have good relationships with their parents and, as I have observed, exhibit good manners. Story 101. They want others to experience their joy and share what they have. Story 102. It depends on the definition of good we use, but let's say principled and compassionate. My parents divorced when I was 9. It became clear they were not well suited, and they separated without turning the house into a war zone. They never used me or my sibling as pawns, and they never badmouthed each other. That set a benchmark for me. I grew up believing that if people who did not love each other could be that respectful and compassionate, then you should be no less with someone you do want to be with. It set a high bar for how to treat other people. Story 103. Checking whether someone is okay when they get hurt or embarrassed instead of laughing. It was one of the first things I noticed about my husband that showed how kind and thoughtful he is. I later learned this comes from growing up in a supportive family that lifts people up instead of ganging up and trying to come out on top. Story 104. They have a Swiss Army knife that is at least 20 years old. Story 105. This applies to all men, regardless of upbringing. Respect women, act like a gentleman, and never take advantage of, manipulate, or behave creepily toward them. This usually goes hand in hand with having a good relationship with one's mother or with strong parenting and role models for those from non-traditional households. Story 106. If they believe they are alone and do not realize they can be seen, they still cover their mouth when yawning or coughing. Story 107. They have self-confidence and independence and are not a mother who constantly tries to parent you through your partner because she is convinced he is very disabled and can never hold a career. So she pushes for disability through his girlfriend without saying it directly. She coddled him from age 5 and told him from age 6 that he was not capable of doing anything on his own and that everything had to be safety padded, because she believed it is not normal for a child to feel overwhelmed by anything. I know this from experience. I cannot ask my mother for help with adult stress because she goes behind my back, impersonating me on the phone to insurance companies and other services to solve problems for me instead of guiding me through them when I ask. Then she tells everyone how hard it was and how incapable and non-functional I am, insisting I should be on disability. She encouraged me to stay home anytime I showed stress in high school, labeling it as a disability, and for decades reassured me that I could never amount to anything. As a teenager struggling with moderate attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the last thing I needed was for her to enable me and tell me to give up. Despite this, I scored in the top 5 on the preliminary SAT at my high school. Living with my mother and my girlfriend for a year while I helped my mother recover from hip and cancer surgery pretty much ruined my relationship. Whenever I was not in the room, my mother would try to parent me through my girlfriend and tell her to convince me to apply for disability benefits, even though I had a job. That made my girlfriend doubt my ability to support her. When I called my mother on it, she acted offended and surprised that my girlfriend had told me. She treated my girlfriend like a parenting ally, as if she had an obligation to keep those secrets from her future husband. I am 30 years old. I still doubt myself whenever I do anything related to adulting. Even filling out Department of Motor Vehicles paperwork makes me think, I'm not capable. I must be making a mistake. Most of that feeling comes from my mother choosing to be apathetic and not teaching me how to manage adult life, blaming everything on disability. I had to teach myself most of it, and I cannot ask her for help. My girlfriend has opened my eyes. Growing up, I was used to my mother's behavior and did not realize how damaging it was. She gave me the confidence to fight for my independence. Even if it is overwhelming sometimes, she helps me break tasks into pieces. My girlfriend is a psychologist, and I resent that she sometimes has to do things my mother should have done, which makes me feel unable to care for myself. But she teaches me and gives me tools to do things on my own and with her, rather than simply telling me I am too fragile to handle it. Story 108. Being well-adjusted is not always a sign of a good upbringing. A person who has had a hard life can be well-adjusted through strong relationships. Conversely, someone with a great family, supportive parents, no trauma, and money can still be deeply flawed. It is a subjective question, but if I must choose one answer, I would say having a good relationship with your family. Story 109. They don't have scars on their bodies where their parents beat them. Story 110. I have a friend from high school. We are both in our 50s. He had a difficult childhood. He lost his father unexpectedly when he was young. His mother struggled with mental health, especially after his father's death. Although they were not in poverty, they had little to spare. His mother loved him but was fighting her own battles. Our lives took different paths. We often talk about our childhoods. I grew up in a stable, loving two-parent household with a lot of extended family involved. He has said repeatedly that the difference was that my parents were invested in me, while his mother was not invested in him. Story 111. I was talking about keeping a credit card open so it would not affect my overall credit limit. My friend asked why. Apparently her credit cards have no limit, which I did not even know was possible. Story 112. When you get to know someone and they tell you about their upbringing, you realize that everything described here can be learned. I had a difficult upbringing, yet I have manners, bring gifts to parties, have integrity, and treat servers with respect. There is no recipe. Story 113. My fiancé has had a stable, wonderful life. I remember on our first date I mentioned offhand that I did not go to college because I could not afford it and did not get great grades. He told me he went to college and his parents paid for it, adding, I am really grateful that my parents paid for my school. They are pretty awesome. The fact that he framed it with gratitude and a smile, with none of the weight of expectations or entitlement, surprised me. For years later I know it is true. They are calm, funny, hardworking people and raised a son very much the same. Story 114. They willingly go on family vacations with their parents or their siblings. Story 115. They relate to almost nothing I say about my parents and raise their eyebrows at my stories. They would probably urge me to stop because it makes them uncomfortable that parents could be so dysfunctional. Story 116. They know how to respect someone's decision without feeling guilt, shame, or obligation. Story 117. I feel that if someone is soft-spoken, listens, considers feedback objectively without getting bent out of shape, is compassionate toward people and objects, and is not prone to anger or other unusual behavior, then they are likely well-adjusted and probably had a good upbringing. Story 118. They are courteous, generous, and humble. They take initiative and approach life positively without being told what to do. Story 119. They fold the clothes after checking the tag at the store. Story 120. They leave their dishes in their room, but they have the motivation to take them out. They are not lazy, depressed, or living with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They simply do not fear their parents. Story 121. We are friends with a couple who have two young boys, about 4 years old. We are not very close with them, but we had them over recently. Their children were friendly, outgoing, and kind. They were excited to explore the house with our slightly older children, to play with the pets, and they did not show the shyness and awkwardness associated with children raised during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic that I am used to seeing in little ones. To me, that is a sign that they are good parents. Story 122. Their views on sensitive topics and their listening ability. Story 123. When they feel empathy, they want to help and reach out to others. Story 124. How they talk about people behind their backs, especially when those people cause them major inconvenience. Story 125. A basic answer is respect. Treat restaurant staff and police officers with respect and hold doors open for others. If you cannot do the basics, your parents clearly could not either. Story 126. You can tell a person's character by the way they treat people who are in no position to benefit them. Someone with a good upbringing will treat such people the same way they treat anyone else. Story 127. Saying yes, sir or ma'am, using please and thank you, holding the door for others, looking people in the eye when speaking, and being genuinely courteous sets people apart. Story 128. Good manners, or a sign of a good upbringing, include the ability to treat others with respect and empathy. When someone is raised in a friendly, caring home, they tend to be gentle, tolerant, and receptive in their interactions. They are good listeners who make others feel important. Courtesy, or the lack of it, shows itself in the home and in a company's interactions with the public. This is not only about knowing which fork to use at a dinner party or saying please and thank you. It also includes opening doors for others and respecting people's personal space. Another characteristic is confidence without arrogance. A well-bred person is confident without being conceited and appreciates the contributions of others. Finally, people with a good upbringing demonstrate work-related values such as responsibility and reliability. They arrive on time, keep their commitments, and take ownership when things go wrong. Story 129. Healthy self-esteem, emotional regulation, and good discernment are products of a healthy attachment to one's parents. Story 130. When they say they never experienced anything traumatic, they do not understand why you are the way you are. Story 131. You can tell when someone has good manners that are second nature. They did not learn manners from a book, nor were they imposed by circumstance. They learned them while growing up. Story 132. How they treat staff at restaurants, hotels, and fast food establishments, as well as their parents and your parents. Story 133. Consistently content with life, they are the ones who can sincerely smile and joke lightheartedly when everyone else is cynical about the situation. Story 134. A subtle sign of a good upbringing is when someone truly listens in conversations, showing genuine interest in others. They ask thoughtful questions and make people feel heard and valued. It is a quiet sign of empathy and good manners learned early on. Story 135. I can usually tell from their tone of voice and whether they are kind and patient toward others. There is a specific regal cadence in the voices of people with a stable childhood. They speak more softly and more eloquently, especially if they were raised in an upper-class environment. Story 136. They have good manners, speak politely, and do not use profanity. They are kind to others, especially to their family and siblings, as well as to older adults and people with disabilities. Story 137. A friend of mine leaves the hallway light on until everyone is home at night, so nobody trips or falls. My dad would give me a long talk about saving electricity and money and so forth. He was beyond me. In every other aspect of life, they're winning too. They even have a swing anchored firmly in their backyard. Story 138. They are not suspicious of strangers and generally treat everyone positively. Story 139. They are an open-minded hippie who does not understand arbitrary discrimination. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.